$94 million. That's what this little piece of paper in my trembling hand says I just won. But instead of celebrating, popping champagne, or calling everyone I know, I'm about to do something that will either destroy my family or save it forever. Something that will reveal the true nature of the people I've loved and supported my entire life. My name is Evelyn Carter, but everyone calls me Nana Evie. I'm 69 years old, and what I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about the people I love most. This story isn't just about winning the lottery. It's about discovering who your real family is when everything is on the line. Before we dive into this story, comment below where you're watching from. I have a feeling this tale might hit differently depending on where you call home, what your family is like, and what you believe about money and love. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything changed, because context matters. I'm a retired librarian living in a small bungalow on the edge of Millbrook, a town where everyone knows everyone and gossip travels faster than the morning paper. My house is modest. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that hasn't been updated since 1987, and a living room where the furniture has seen better decades. My days were routine, predictable, and honestly, pretty tight on money. You know how it is when you're living on a fixed income. Every dollar is accounted for, every expense carefully considered. Senior yoga on Tuesdays at the community center, $5 a session. Church on Sundays, where I still play piano for the early service, even though my arthritis makes it harder each year. Baked chicken on Wednesdays because it's cheap and I can make it stretch for 3 meals. I shop with coupons, buy generic brands, and my biggest luxury is the premium coffee I allow myself on Saturday mornings. My car is a 2009 Honda Civic that rattles when it rains and has a crack in the windshield I keep meaning to fix but can't quite afford. The heater works most of the time. The air conditioning gave up 2 summers ago, and I've learned to live with both. But I wasn't unhappy. I had my books, my garden, my routines. I had my family, even if our relationships were complicated. And I had hope. Every Tuesday for the past 15 years, I've bought the same lottery ticket at Murphy's Corner store. Same numbers, 07 for the day my late husband proposed, 14 for the anniversary of our wedding, 23 for the day my first grandchild was born, 31 for my birthday, 42 for the number of years I worked at the library, and 18 for the Powerball because that's how old I was when I met my husband. Same numbers again, Mrs. Carter? Murphy would ask every week. His weathered hands taking my $5. Same numbers, Murphy. You never know. You never know, he'd agree, handing me that slip of hope. Last Tuesday was my birthday, 69 years old, and I was sitting alone in my kitchen with a store-bought cupcake and a single candle. My children had called earlier, quick conversations, the kind where you can hear them multitasking in the background. Happy birthday, Mom. Love you. Sorry, I'm in the middle of something. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the newspaper and my reading glasses, the same routine I'd followed for years. Check the weather, read the obituaries. Morbid, I know, but at my age, you want to make sure you're not in them. And then, almost as an afterthought, check my lottery numbers. I pulled out the ticket from where I keep it, tucked behind the sugar bowl. The winning numbers were printed right there in black and white. 07, 14, 23, 31, 42, Powerball, 18. Wait. 07. That matched, but it always matched. That was my number. 14. That matched too. But again, that was my number. 23? My heart started beating a little bit faster. 31? I could feel my hands beginning to shake. 42? This can't be happening. And the Powerball. 18. I stared at that ticket for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I looked at the newspaper, I looked at the ticket, I looked at the newspaper again. The numbers didn't change. They were exactly the same. This can't be real, I whispered to myself in my empty kitchen, my voice echoing off the old linoleum floors. This doesn't happen to people like me. I set the ticket down very carefully on the counter, like it might explode if I handled it wrong. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn on the stove to put the kettle on. I needed tea. I needed to think. I needed to make sure I wasn't having some kind of senior moment. While the water heated, I walked to my computer, an ancient desktop that takes 5 minutes to boot up, and looked up the lottery website. There they were, the winning numbers posted officially: 07, 14, 23, 31, 42, Powerball 18, jackpot $94 million. $94 million. After taxes, about $56 million. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. More money than everyone in my family had ever seen combined. Life-changing, world-altering, everything will be different money. I made my tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and sat back down at that same kitchen table where I'd eaten thousands of meals alone, paid countless bills, and worried about money more times than I could count. And I made a decision that would have surprised everyone who knew me. I decided to tell no one. Not yet. Not until I figured some things out. See, money has a way of revealing people's true nature. And my family? Well, we had a very complicated history with money. I'd learned some hard lessons over the years about what happens when family members see you as a potential solution to their financial problems rather than as a person they love. Let me tell you about my son, Thomas. Thomas is 45 years old, married to a woman named Kayla, and they have 2 kids, my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, who I adore. Thomas works in sales for a medical equipment company, makes decent money, and lives in a house that's way too big for their actual needs, but perfect for the image they want to project. 5 years ago, Thomas came to me with tears in his eyes. Real tears. I'd never seen my son cry as an adult, so I knew whatever was happening was serious. His business was failing, he said. He'd started a side company selling health supplements online, and it was supposed to be their ticket to financial freedom. But the inventory wasn't moving, the website wasn't generating traffic, and he was about to lose everything. "Mom, I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate," he told me, as we sat at this same kitchen table where I would later discover my lottery win. "This business is everything to me, to my family. If I lose this, I don't know what we'll do. The kids' school, the house payment, everything depends on this working." He needed $10,000 to save everything, he said. Just enough to keep the lights on, pay the suppliers, maybe invest in some marketing. It would tide him over until the business turned around, which he was sure would happen within a few months. Of course I helped him. He was my son, he was in tears, and $10,000 was essentially my entire savings account. But what's money compared to your child's well-being? I went to the bank the next day and transferred every penny I had to his account. "I'll pay you back as soon as things turn around, Mom. I promise. This means everything to me." 1 week later, 1 week, Clayla was posting pictures all over social media of their reset vacation in Cancun. They stayed at an all-inclusive resort, went parasailing, took sunset sailing trips, and generally lived it up for 10 days in paradise. $10,000 worth of reset, apparently. When I confronted Thomas about it, he got defensive. "Mom, we needed that trip. The stress of the business failing was killing us. We had to get away and clear our heads so we could figure out what to do next." "With my money, Thomas. You used my money to go on vacation while I'm eating ramen noodles so I can afford my medication. It was an investment in our mental health. You wouldn't understand." The business never turned around, by the way. 3 months later, he shut it down and went back to his regular sales job. He never mentioned paying me back. And when I brought it up, he said the business failure had wiped out any chance of returning the money. I should consider it a family investment that just didn't work out. Then there was my daughter, Renee. Renee is 38, married to Mark, who works in finance and wears suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They live in a beautiful house in the suburbs with a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and a kitchen that looks like something out of a magazine. Renee came to me 2 years after the Thomas incident, but her approach was different. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She was very matter-of-fact and businesslike about it. She needed $4,000 for wedding deposits, the venue, the caterer, the photographer. She was getting married to Mark, and they wanted to do it right. "It's just temporary, Mom," she promised me in that pristine kitchen with the marble countertops that probably cost more than my car. "We'll pay you back as soon as the wedding gifts come in. You know how these things work. People give money, and we'll have more than enough to cover what we borrowed." She had spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, showing projected gift amounts based on the guest list and average wedding gift values. It was very convincing, very professional. Mark nodded along, talking about their cash flow timeline and how this was just a short-term bridge loan. So I gave her the $4,000. It wiped out the small emergency fund I'd managed to rebuild after helping Thomas, but it was for her wedding, her special day. How could I say no? The wedding was beautiful, absolutely stunning. They had a live band, an open bar, a 7-course dinner, and ice sculptures shaped like swans. The photographer they hired had shot celebrities. The flowers alone probably cost more than I spend on groceries in 6 months. That was 5 years ago. 5 years. The house has been completely renovated since then. New kitchen, new bathrooms, new flooring throughout. They bought a boat. They take expensive vacations twice a year. Renee drives a brand new SUV that she trades in every 3 years. But that $4,000? It got lost somewhere between the marble countertops and the second master bathroom. Whenever I brought it up, there was always a reason why they couldn't pay it back right now. Mark's bonus was delayed. They had unexpected expenses. The kids needed this or that. Always something. "We haven't forgotten, Mom," Renee would say, patting my hand condescendingly. "It's just that things are tight right now with the house and everything." Things were tight for them in their 6-bedroom house with the pool and the boat. Meanwhile, I was clipping coupons and buying generic cereal, trying to stretch my Social Security check to cover my medication and my utilities. But here's the thing. There was one person in my family who never asked for anything and always showed up. My sister, Ruth. Ruth is 2 years younger than me, and she's been my best friend since we were children growing up in our parents' small farmhouse outside town. Ruth teaches first grade at the elementary school, the same job she's had for 35 years. She makes $38,000 a year, drives a 15-year-old Toyota Corolla with a dent in the passenger door from where she backed into a mailbox 3 years ago, and lives in a tiny apartment above the bakery on Main Street. Ruth has never been married, never had children of her own, but she treats my kids and grandkids like they're her own family. She remembers every birthday, every school play, every soccer game. She shows up with homemade cookies when the kids are sick, helps with homework when asked, and has never missed a single family gathering in 40 years. When my husband died 8 years ago, Ruth took a week off work to stay with me. She cooked, she cleaned, she answered the phone when I couldn't bear to talk to another person offering condolences. She held me while I cried and never once made me feel like I was being a burden. When I had my hip surgery 3 years ago, Ruth drove me to every physical therapy appointment for 2 months. She rearranged her teaching schedule, used her sick days, and never complained once about the inconvenience. When the hot water heater in my house died last winter, Ruth showed up with tools and a YouTube video tutorial, and we spent an entire Saturday figuring out how to install a new one because I couldn't afford to call a plumber. She brings me vegetables from the community garden where she volunteers. She fixes my computer when it acts up. She takes me grocery shopping when my car is in the shop. She does all of this without being asked, without expecting anything in return, and she's never, not once in 69 years, asked me for money. Not once. Ruth makes less money than anyone in our family, lives in the smallest space, drives the oldest car, and yet she's the most generous person I know. Not generous with money, she doesn't have money to spare, but generous with her time, her energy, her love. So when I won that lottery, sitting in my kitchen with my hands shaking and my mind racing, I thought about Thomas and Kayla in Cancun. I thought about Renee's marble countertops and her unpaid debt. And I thought about Ruth, who had given me everything she had to give without ever expecting anything in return. The morning after I won, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a lawyer. I found Jonathan Halden through the phone book. Yes, I still use the phone book, and made an appointment for that same day. His office was downtown in one of the old historic buildings with mahogany furniture and law books lining the walls and certificates that showed he'd been practicing for 30 years. Mr. Halden was kind but direct, the sort of man who probably dealt with sudden wealth situations before. Mrs. Carter, first of all, congratulations. This is truly life-changing money. But before we do anything else, I need to ask, who have you told about this win? No one, I said, clutching my purse in my lap like a life preserver. Good. That's very good. Keep it that way until we have a comprehensive plan in place. Money like this changes relationships, Mrs. Carter. Sometimes for the better, but often not. People you've known your whole life suddenly see you differently. Some will want to help you manage it. Some will want to protect you from yourself, and some will want to relieve you of the burden of having so much. He wasn't being cynical, just realistic. We'll set up a blind trust to protect your privacy, bring in a financial planner to help you understand your options, and make sure everything is structured properly for tax purposes. But here's my most important advice, and I give this to every lottery winner I represent. Take time to really think about what you want this money to do, not just for you, but for the people around you. He paused, looking at me seriously. Money reveals character, Mrs. Carter, in yourself and in others. Before you make any major decisions about giving or sharing, make sure you know who you're really dealing with. I left his office with a head full of questions and a plan to think everything through carefully. Mr. Halden would handle the legal aspects, set up the trust, make sure I could claim the prize anonymously. But he gave me one rule that would change everything. Keep quiet and make a plan. So I kept my routine. Same old sedan that rattled in the rain, same budget grocery shopping with my envelope of carefully counted cash, Same everything. I went to senior yoga, played piano at church, baked my Wednesday chicken. I watched my neighbors and tried to imagine how they'd react if they knew the woman clipping coupons in the grocery store was sitting on $56 million. But inside, one question was eating at me, keeping me awake at night and distracted during the day. If I ever told my family about the money, who would be genuinely happy for me and who would immediately start calculating what they could get out of it? I needed to know. Not for the money. I'd already decided that the vast majority of it would go to charity and helping people who really needed it. But for my own peace of mind, for the relationships I'd have with these people for the rest of my life, I needed to understand who they really were when it mattered. That's when I decided to conduct a test. And what I discovered broke my heart and opened my eyes in ways I never expected. The test I designed felt like swallowing glass, but I had to know. I would tell each family member that I was in serious financial trouble. I'd say my furnace had completely broken down and couldn't be repaired. I had some medical tests coming up that insurance wouldn't cover, and I needed $10,000 to bridge the gap until a pension adjustment came through next month. It was a lie. I hated lying to people I loved, but I needed clarity more than I needed comfort. And sometimes the truth requires a little deception to reveal itself. $10,000 was a significant amount, but not impossible for any of them to help with if they chose to. It was enough to be a real sacrifice, which would show who cared enough to make one, but not so much that it would be completely unreasonable to ask. I also chose that amount very deliberately because it was exactly what Thomas had asked me for, and almost 3 times what Renee had borrowed. If they couldn't help me with the same amount I'd given them, well, that would tell me something important about gratitude and family loyalty. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have told your family right away, or would you have tested them first? Let me know below. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective, especially if you've ever been in a situation where money complicated family relationships. I started with Thomas, my firstborn, the child I'd nursed through colic and walked the floors with during countless sleepless nights. I called him on a Tuesday morning and asked if we could meet for coffee. There was something important I needed to discuss with him. We met at Brewster's Coffee House downtown, a place we'd been to many times over the years for birthday breakfasts and graduation celebrations. But this time felt different. Thomas walked in looking rushed, checking his expensive watch, a gift from Kayla for his last birthday, probably worth more than my monthly income. Sorry I'm late, Mom. Traffic was insane, and I've got a conference call with the West Coast team in 20 minutes, so we'll need to make this quick. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask me how I was doing. He sat down across from me, already pulling out his phone to check messages, clearly treating this like another item on his to-do list. Thomas, I need to talk to you about something serious, something that's been keeping me up at night. I felt like I'd been slapped. Hoarding? Thomas, those books were my career, and that china belonged to your great-grandmother. Right, and now it's just sitting in your cabinet collecting dust while you're supposedly struggling to pay bills. You need to make some practical decisions here, Mom. Downsize the house, sell the stuff you don't actually need. Maybe consider moving into one of those senior communities where you wouldn't have to worry about furnaces and maintenance. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Actually, I can send you some links to senior living facilities in the area. Kayla was just saying the other day that it might be time to start thinking about that kind of transition. You're not getting any younger, and these kinds of financial crises are just going to keep happening. For the next 15 minutes, Thomas gave me a lecture about budgeting, downsizing, and not enabling bad habits. He talked about personal responsibility and living within your means. He suggested I get a financial advisor, maybe take a class on money management for seniors. What he didn't do was offer to help. Not with money, not with finding contractors, not with anything practical. He never said, "Let me see what I can do," or "Maybe we can figure something out together." He treated me like a case study in poor financial planning rather than his mother in need. "Look, Mom, I really need to run. This call is important. But think about what I said, okay? Sometimes tough love is the best love." He stood up, patted my shoulder like you'd pat a dog, and walked out, leaving me sitting there with my cold coffee and a heart full of disbelief. Later that evening, as I was making dinner and trying to process what had happened, my phone buzzed with a text message from Kayla. "Thomas told me about your situation. Have you considered selling your grandmother's china? I saw similar pieces on eBay going for really good money. Also, there are some great estate sale companies that could help you declutter. Let me know if you want some referrals. XOXO." I stared at that message for a long time. My grandmother's china, the set that had been in our family for 3 generations, that I'd carefully hand-washed after every holiday dinner, that held memories of countless family celebrations. Kayla wanted me to sell it to pay for my broken furnace? The same woman who had posted pictures of her Cancun vacation, paid for with my money, was suggesting I sell family heirlooms to solve my financial problems. Maybe Renee would be different, I thought. She'd always been the more emotional one, more connected to family feelings and relationships. She cried at commercials and remembered everyone's birthdays and sent thoughtful cards for no reason. I called her that Thursday and asked if I could come over to talk. "Of course, Mom. I'll make us some tea. Is everything okay?" Renee's house always made me feel a little inadequate. Everything was so perfect, so coordinated, so expensive. The foyer had fresh flowers that were replaced twice a week. The living room looked like a magazine spread, and the kitchen, their second kitchen remodel since I'd helped pay for the wedding, was something out of a home design show. We sat at her marble island, the one I'd helped pay for, without knowing it, and I explained the same situation I'd presented to Thomas. Renee listened with her hands folded, nodding sympathetically, making appropriate concerned noises. "That's absolutely awful, Mom. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Old houses are just money pits, aren't they? Mark and I were just saying how glad we are that we bought new construction so we don't have to deal with aging systems." She squeezed my hands across that cold marble surface, her perfectly manicured nails a stark contrast to my work-worn fingers. "The medical tests sound scary, too. What kind of tests? Have you gotten a second opinion on the cost? Sometimes these doctors try to charge way more than necessary, especially to older patients who might not know better." I appreciated that she was asking questions, showing interest in the details. It felt more caring than Thomas's immediate dismissal. "I just need to borrow $10,000 to get through this month. The pension adjustment will cover me going forward, but right now—" $10,000, she interrupted, releasing my hands and standing up abruptly. Oh, Mom, oh no, the timing, it couldn't be worse. And then came the list, the comprehensive, detailed list of why helping me was impossible right now. We just committed to private school tuition for both kids for the rest of the year. That's $30,000 right there, and it's due in advance. Emma's violin lessons, Jake's travel baseball team, the orthodontist bills that insurance barely covers. She started pacing around her perfect kitchen, gesturing at things that represented their financial obligations. And the SUV lease is up for renewal next month. We've been looking at the new model, and the payments are going to be higher. Plus, Mark has been talking about finally finishing the master bathroom renovation. You know how long we've been planning that? She paused at the window, looking out at their perfectly landscaped backyard. And honestly, Mom, we're still recovering from Christmas. Do you know how much it costs to make Christmas magical for kids these days? Emma wanted that American Girl doll set up, and Jake had to have the gaming system that all his friends have. I sat there listening, thinking about Christmases when my children were young. We made cookies from scratch, gave each other homemade gifts, and considered ourselves lucky if there was enough money for one special present each. But let me talk to Mark about it, okay? Maybe we can work something out. He's better with numbers than I am, and he might have ideas about restructuring some things. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of waiting for a phone call that would tell me whether my daughter and her financially successful husband could find a way to help their struggling mother with the same amount of money I'd given them for their wedding 5 years ago. Finally, Mark called. Not Renee, Mark. His voice was professional, distant, like he was calling about a business transaction rather than talking to his mother-in-law about a family emergency. Hi, Evelyn. It's Mark. Renee asked me to run the numbers on that loan situation you discussed. I've done a comprehensive analysis of our current budget and projected expenses for the next quarter, and honestly, with the kids' educational costs and our existing financial commitments, I just don't see how we can accommodate a $10,000 outlay right now. He talked about cash flow and liquidity and financial planning like I was a potential client he was turning down rather than a family member in need. However, I do have some suggestions that might help you address the situation independently. Have you considered a home equity loan? With current property values in your area, you should have significant equity in your house that you could access at relatively favorable interest rates. He went on to suggest reverse mortgages, personal loans, and even selling my car to buy something cheaper. He had clearly put thought into alternatives for me to solve my own problems. I've also researched some senior assistance programs that might help with heating costs and medical expenses. I can email you some links if you'd like to pursue those options. I appreciate you looking into it, Mark, I said when he finally stopped talking. Thank you for taking the time. Of course, we want to help however we can. And Evelyn, you might want to consider working with a financial planner to avoid these kinds of situations in the future. I can recommend someone if you're interested. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd discovered my lottery win, where I'd made the decision to test my family, and tried to process what had just happened. Mark had run the numbers. He treated my request like a business proposal and determined that the return on investment wasn't favorable for them. My daughter's husband had analyzed my crisis and found it insufficient to warrant disrupting their plans for private school and bathroom renovations. Do you think what Thomas and Renee did was right or wrong? Were they being practical and financially responsible, or were they being selfish and ungrateful? Comment your take. No judgment here. I genuinely want to know what you think, especially if you've been in a similar situation with family members.
Before I could even work up the courage to call Ruth and subject her to the same test, my phone rang. The caller ID showed her name, and I felt my stomach clench with guilt about what I was planning to do. "Evie, honey," came her warm voice, the voice that had comforted me through childhood nightmares and adult heartbreaks. "I heard through the grapevine that you're having a rough week. Are you all right?" Ruth had heard through the grapevine. In a small town like ours, that means someone, probably Thomas or Renee, had mentioned my situation to someone else, and word had traveled. But Ruth wasn't calling because she'd heard gossip. She was calling because she was worried about me. "I'm managing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's been a challenging few days." "Well, I'm not accepting managing as an answer. Get your coat. I'm picking you up in 10 minutes, and we're going to Murphy's Diner. You're going to tell me what's really going on, and we're going to figure out how to fix it." Murphy's Diner hadn't changed in 30 years. Same cracked vinyl booths, same handwritten specials on the chalkboard, same honest food at honest prices. Ruth and I had been coming here together since we were teenagers, and it felt like a safe place to have difficult conversations. Ruth slid into the booth across from me, her teacher's cardigan a little worn at the elbows, her gray hair pulled back in the same simple style she'd worn for decades. Her eyes were focused entirely on me. No phone in sight, no distractions, no divided attention. "Now," she said, reaching across the table to take my hands, "tell me what's really going on. And don't give me the 'I'm fine' routine. I've known you for 69 years, Evelyn Carter. I can tell when you're scared."
So I told her the same story I told Thomas and Renee about the broken furnace and the medical tests and needing $10,000 to bridge the gap until my pension adjustment came through. But this time, as I spoke, I could see genuine concern growing in Ruth's eyes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't check her watch or look around the restaurant. She listened to every word, asked clarifying questions about the medical tests, wanted to know if I was in pain or worried about the results. When I finished explaining my situation, Ruth didn't hesitate for even a second. "How much do you need again?" "10,000, but Ruth, I wasn't calling to ask you." "I know you weren't calling to ask, but I'm asking what you need." She was already reaching into her purse, pulling out a worn envelope. "It's not everything, but it's $6,000 in cash. I stopped at the bank on my way to pick you up." I stared at the envelope she was sliding across the table. "Ruth, you can't just happen to have $6,000 in cash." She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "I've been saving for a new car. Mine's been making some concerning noises lately, and I figured I'd need to replace it soon, but cars can wait. Furnaces can't." I knew what Ruth earned. $38,000 a year teaching first grade, with no raises for the past 3 years because of budget cuts. I knew she lived in that tiny apartment above the bakery, paying $800 a month in rent. I knew she shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons just like I did. This envelope contained nearly all of her savings, money she'd been carefully setting aside for months, maybe years, so she could replace her 15-year-old car when it finally gave up completely. "Ruth, you can't just happen to have $6,000 in cash." She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "My security is knowing my sister is okay. The money is just paper, Evie. Your blood, your family. You held my hand when Mom died. You took care of me when I had pneumonia 2 winters ago. You've been there for every important moment of my life." She leaned forward, speaking more quietly, but with absolute conviction. "When I was trying to decide whether to take early retirement last year, because the job was getting so stressful,
You talked me through it for hours. You helped me see that I still had good years left to give those kids. You saved my career, probably saved my sanity. I remembered that conversation. Ruth had been overwhelmed by new testing requirements, larger class sizes, and parents who treated teachers like service workers rather than professionals. She wanted to quit, to just walk away from the job she'd loved for 30 years. And when Mrs. Henderson next door was going to report me to the landlord for having too many plants on the fire escape, you marched over there and charmed her into letting me keep my little garden. You probably saved my housing situation. These weren't grand gestures I'd made. They were just what you do for people you love. You listen, you support, you solve small problems when you can. The point is, Ruth continued, we take care of each other. That's what family does. Real family. She reached across the table again, this time squeezing my hands firmly. And Evie, if things get really bad, if the furnace costs more than expected or the medical bills pile up, my couch pulls out into a bed. It's not much, but your family. You'll never be without a place to sleep as long as I have a roof over my head. I started crying right there in Murphy's Diner between the meatloaf special and the lemon meringue pie. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood what real love looked like. It looked like Ruth emptying her savings account without being asked about it. It looked like offering your couch to someone who needs it. It looked like showing up with solutions instead of lectures. "Honey, what's wrong?" Ruth asked, alarmed by my tears. "Are you in pain? Is it worse than you told me?" "No," I managed to say through my crying. "It's not worse. Ruth, you just gave me everything you have without thinking twice about it." "Of course I did. You would do the same for me." And she was right. I would have. I had done the same for Thomas and Renee, and they couldn't even be bothered to try. That evening, Ruth came home with me to help me start calling furnace repair companies because she believed my story and wanted to help me solve the problem. She sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, writing down quotes and asking practical questions about installation timelines and warranties. She said, "You know what? My friend Janet's son-in-law does HVAC work. Good guy, fair prices. Let me call her and see if he might give you a family discount." She was already planning how to stretch the money further, how to make sure I got the best possible value for what we had to work with. While Thomas had lectured me about downsizing and Mark had suggested home equity loans, Ruth was sitting in my kitchen trying to find me a furnace I could actually afford. I couldn't carry the lie any longer. Watching her make phone calls on my behalf, seeing her sacrifice her own security for mine, knowing that she was genuinely worried about my well-being, it was too much. "Ruth," I said, setting down my teacup with hands that were starting to shake again, "there's something I need to tell you, something important." She looked up from her notepad, pencil poised, ready to write down another contractor's number. "What is it, honey?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us, hoping it wouldn't change the fundamental truth of who Ruth was. I haven't lost my furnace. I don't have medical tests coming up. I won the lottery, Ruth. $94 million. The pencil stopped moving. Ruth blinked once, twice, 3 times, processing what I'd just said. The kitchen was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking on the wall. "Well," she said finally, setting down her pencil carefully, "that would explain the shaking hands I noticed at church last Sunday. You're not angry? I lied to you. I made you worry about me for no reason. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, looking at me with those kind, intelligent eyes that had seen me through every crisis of my adult life. Honey, you weren't lying to me. You were learning about me. And frankly, I'm glad you know who is who. She paused, folding her hands in her lap. So, what do you feel about it? Winning all that money? Terrified. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to be a person who has that much money. You'll figure it out. You're one of the smartest people I know. She smiled, but it was tinged with something that looked like sadness. So, what are you going to do with all that money? It was the first time anyone had asked me that question without an ulterior motive. Thomas and Renee hadn't asked because they didn't know, but I had a feeling that when they found out, their first question would be about what they might get out of it. I don't know yet. What do you think I should do? Whatever makes you sleep well at night. Money's a tool, Evie. The question is what you want to build with it. We sat in silence for a while, both of us thinking about what this meant, how it changed things, what it revealed about the people in our lives. Ruth, I said finally, you just offered me your life savings and your couch. You were ready to sacrifice your own security for mine without knowing I had millions of dollars sitting in a bank account. That's what family does. No, I said, thinking about Thomas's lectures and Mark's financial analysis. That's what you do. That's who you are. Ruth didn't ask for anything that night. She didn't mention her old car or her tiny apartment or her teacher's salary that barely covered her expenses. She didn't suddenly remember projects that needed funding or dreams that required money to achieve. Instead, she asked if I was sleeping okay. She wanted to know if my knees were still bothering me, whether I was taking my vitamins, if I was feeling overwhelmed by the decision-making ahead of me. Are you eating enough? You look a little thinner than usual. Are you taking care of yourself emotionally? This kind of sudden change can be really stressful. Do you have someone helping you with the legal and financial aspects? You shouldn't try to handle this alone. These were the questions of someone who loved me for who I was, not what I could do for them. These were the concerns of a person who had just learned that her sister was incredibly wealthy and was worried about the sister, not the wealth. That's when I knew my test had given me everything I needed to know about the people in my life. At this point in the story, who do you trust? Ruth obviously passed the test with flying colors, but what would you do about Thomas and Renee? What would you do about the relationships that had been revealed to be conditional? Drop your guess about what happens next.
The next week, I went back to see Mr. Halden, my lawyer. His office felt different now that I'd completed my experiment. The mahogany furniture and legal certificates looked the same, but I felt like a different person sitting in that leather chair across from his desk. Mrs. Carter, you look more settled than when I saw you last. Have you had time to think about what you want to do? I have, I said, and I meant it. I want to set up a trust for my sister Ruth. I explained my test, what I'd learned about my family members, and Ruth's response to my fabricated crisis. Mr. Halden listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Monthly payments that will cover her medical care, housing, and living expenses, I continued. Enough to give her a dignified retirement without her having to worry about money, but structured so she never feels like she has to ask for anything or justify her expenses. And she doesn't know about this yet? No, I want it to be a surprise. I want her to be able to retire from teaching whenever she's ready, not when her body gives out or the budget cuts make the job impossible. Mr. Halden was writing rapidly.
What about your children? I had thought about this extensively. I'm not cutting them off, but I'm not making them wealthy either. If there are genuine emergencies, health crises, safety issues, true hardship, I'll help through a foundation that I want to establish. But it will be case by case, and it will be my decision. A foundation? For local seniors, for people dealing with unexpected expenses that keep them up at night worrying. Roof repairs, medical bills, heating system failures, car repairs, the kinds of things that can devastate someone on a fixed income. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake before winning the lottery, calculating whether I could afford my blood pressure medication and still pay the electric bill. I thought about neighbors who chose between heating their homes and buying groceries. I want to help people the way Ruth tried to help me, quietly, without bureaucracy, without making them feel ashamed for needing assistance. Mr. Halden looked up from his notes. And your children? How much did they know about your change in circumstances? Nothing yet, and I'm not sure I'll ever tell them about the lottery. But I am going to have a conversation with them about boundaries and expectations. I had been thinking about this for days. Thomas and Renee had shown me who they were when they thought I needed help. They had revealed their true priorities, their actual level of concern for my well-being. The lottery money hadn't caused this revelation. It had simply illuminated what was already there. I also want to look for a small house near me, something with good accessibility features and a sunny garden where Ruth can grow her flowers. Over the next several weeks, Mr. Halden and his team worked on setting up the legal structures I needed. The foundation was established with a modest but sustainable endowment. Ruth's trust was created with monthly distributions that would begin as soon as I was ready to tell her about it. But first, I had something else to do. I had to face my children and establish new ground rules for our relationships. I called both Thomas and Renee and asked them to come to my house on a Saturday afternoon. I told them I had some important news to share about my financial situation. Both of them assumed, I think, that this was going to be a conversation about my ongoing struggles and perhaps another request for help. Thomas arrived first with Kayla in tow. Both of them looked slightly put upon, like they were making a sacrifice to be there. Kayla was checking her phone constantly, and Thomas kept mentioning that they had plans later in the evening. Renee and Mark came next, apologizing for being 5 minutes late because they'd had to drop the kids at Renee's mother-in-law's house. They settled into my living room with the air of people preparing to endure an unpleasant but necessary family obligation. Ruth was there too, sitting quietly in the corner chair by the window, the place she'd occupied during countless family gatherings over the years. She was the only person in the room who knew what this meeting was really about, and she looked calm but supportive. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing in front of my family in the living room where I'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings and graduations. I wanted to clear the air about my recent financial situation and discuss some changes in how our family handles money going forward. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, if this is about that loan request, we explained our situation. Things are really tight right now." "I understand your situations," I said calmly, "but this isn't about asking for more help. Actually, I have some good news. I've secured a new position with better pay and benefits."
This was technically true. I had become the director of my own foundation with a modest but adequate salary for my needs. Shoulders visibly dropped around the room. The relief was palpable. They wouldn't have to deal with my financial problems after all. That's wonderful, Mom, Renee said, sounding genuinely pleased. What kind of position? Nonprofit work, helping seniors in the community. Again, technically true. Great, Thomas said, already reaching for his phone. So everything's sorted out then? Not quite everything. I wanted to talk about what happened when I thought I was in trouble and what it taught me about our family dynamics. The room grew tense. Kayla stopped checking her phone. Mark put down the magazine he'd been flipping through. When I reached out for help, some of you offered advice. Some of you offered suggestions about downsizing or selling my belongings or restructuring my life. Very few asked what I actually needed most, which was a little compassion and practical support. Thomas looked defensive. Mom, we were trying to help you think through your options. Were you? Or were you trying to avoid helping me with money? That's not fair, Renee said. We explained our budget constraints. It's not that we didn't want to help, it's that we couldn't. Couldn't or wouldn't? I asked. Because while you couldn't find a way to help me with the same amount I gave you for your wedding 5 years ago, you somehow found money for a bathroom renovation and a new SUV? Mark started to say something about different budget categories and planned versus unplanned expenses, but I held up my hand. I'm not here to argue about the specifics. I'm here to explain how things will work going forward. I looked around the room at these people I'd raised, supported, and loved unconditionally for decades. I will not be lending money anymore. I will not be rescuing anyone from purchases they chose to make or lifestyle decisions that create financial pressure. If there's a true emergency, health, safety, genuine crisis, I will decide privately how to respond. That seems a little harsh, don't you think? Kayla said, her voice taking on an edge. Family is supposed to help family. You're absolutely right. Family is supposed to help family. And when I needed help, family responded very differently. I gestured toward Ruth, who had been sitting quietly through this entire conversation. Ruth showed up with her life savings and offered me her couch. She didn't lecture me about financial planning or suggest I sell my grandmother's china. She asked what I needed and figured out how to provide it. Ruth looked embarrassed by the attention, but she didn't deny what had happened. Ruth makes a third of what any of you make, lives in a tiny apartment, and drives a car that's older than my grandchildren. But when her sister needed help, she emptied her savings account without being asked. The room was completely silent now. Thomas was staring at his hands. Renee was looking out the window. Mark and Kayla exchanged glances that suggested they were mentally calculating how to exit this conversation gracefully. I'm not angry, I continued, which was mostly true. I was disappointed, hurt, and disillusioned, but not angry. I'm just clear now about what our relationships actually are versus what I thought they were. Mom, Thomas said, this isn't fair. We have responsibilities, obligations. So did I when you needed $10,000 for your business. So did I when Renee needed money for her wedding.
I had the same kinds of budget pressures and financial limitations you have now, but I found a way to help because you're my children and I love you." Renee started crying. "We do love you, Mom. It's not about love, isn't it? Because when I thought about whether to help you with wedding expenses, I didn't run the numbers or check my budget categories. I thought about what my daughter needed to be happy, and I made it happen." I sat down in my own chair, feeling emotionally drained, but also oddly relieved. Here's what I learned from this experience. I taught you that my resources were available to solve your problems, but I never taught you that love goes both ways. I created relationships where I was the giver and you were the receivers. And when the roles needed to reverse, the system broke down. Mark cleared his throat. "So, what exactly are you saying, Evelyn? What changes are you proposing?"
I'm saying that from now on, emergency help will be evaluated case by case, based on genuine need rather than poor planning or lifestyle maintenance. I'm saying that I won't be anyone's backup plan for funding choices that you made independently. I looked at each of them in turn. I'm also saying that when someone in this family has a real crisis, I expect all of us to at least try to help. Not just me, all of us. Thomas stood up abruptly. "This whole thing feels like some kind of punishment for not being able to help you out of a temporary jam." "It's not punishment, Thomas. It's clarity. It's me understanding what our relationships actually look like when the roles are reversed." Kayla gathered her purse. "Well, I think we've heard enough. Come on, Thomas, we have dinner reservations." They left without hugging me goodbye, without asking if I was okay, without showing any interest in how this revelation might be affecting me emotionally. Renee lingered a little longer. "Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. We should have tried harder to help you." "I appreciate that, sweetheart, but this isn't about apologies. It's about understanding who we really are to each other." Mark shook my hand like we just concluded a business meeting, and they left too. Ruth and I sat in my living room in the aftermath, surrounded by the echo of difficult truths and shifting family dynamics. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Sad, relieved, clear." I looked at my sister, the one person in my family who had shown up when it mattered. "Ruth, there's something else I need to tell you." Over the next hour, I explained the trust I'd set up for her, the house I wanted to help her buy, the secure retirement I wanted to give her as a thank you for a lifetime of showing up when it mattered. Ruth cried when I told her she could retire from teaching whenever she was ready, that she'd never have to worry about medical bills or housing costs or whether her car would make it through another winter. "Evie, this is too much. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can, because this isn't charity or pity or me trying to solve your problems. This is me making sure that the person who has always taken care of everyone else gets taken care of too." "But what about Thomas and Renee? Won't they be upset when they find out?" I thought about that. Maybe. Probably. But Ruth, they had the same opportunity you did to show me who they were when it mattered. They made different choices. "Family is complicated," she said softly. "It is, but love doesn't have to be." 1 year later, my life looks completely different, and so does my understanding of what family actually means. I live in a smaller house now, a tidy 2-bedroom cottage with a garden where I drink my morning coffee and watch the sunrise, paint the sky different colors every day. It's simpler than my old house, easier to maintain, and it feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived.
3 blocks away, Ruth lives in a beautiful little craftsman cottage that we found together. It has everything she needs: a wheelchair-accessible ramp that we hope she won't need for many years, but that gives us both peace of mind, grab bars in the bathroom, and most importantly, a flower bed full of zinnias and marigolds and cosmos that makes her grin every time she sees it. The house has a sunny front porch where Ruth sits in the mornings grading papers when she chooses to substitute teach, which she does because she loves it, not because she needs the money. She's taken up watercolor painting in her retirement, something she always wanted to try but never had time for when she was working full-time. With her money stress gone, Ruth's blood pressure has stabilized and her chronic stress headaches have disappeared. She sleeps better, laughs more, and has started volunteering at the library's children's reading hour on Saturday mornings. Watching her read stories to fascinated 5-year-olds, seeing the joy on her face when they get excited about books, reminds me why she was such a wonderful teacher for all those years. The Senior Support Foundation, which I run from a small office downtown, has become the most rewarding work of my life. We've quietly patched roofs for elderly homeowners who couldn't afford contractors, installed safety railings for people recovering from falls, and paid impossible medical bills for seniors choosing between medication and groceries. Last month, we helped Mrs. Peterson get her furnace repaired when it actually did break down, and we paid for Mr. Goldstein's cancer medication when his insurance company denied his claim. We replaced the transmission in elderly Mrs. Chin's car so she could keep getting to her dialysis appointments, and we brought groceries for the Martinez family when Mr. Martinez was hospitalized and couldn't work.
All of this is done quietly, anonymously when possible, with no publicity and no strings attached. No one has to fill out extensive paperwork or prove their worthiness or submit to financial counseling. If they need help and we can provide it, we do. I think about my fake crisis often, about how terrifying it felt to need help and not know where it would come from. Now I make sure that other people don't have to experience that fear alone. On Thursday nights, my grandchildren come to my new house for our standing spaghetti dinner and card game tradition. Emma is 11 now and beats me at gin rummy more often than not. Jake is 9 and still young enough to let me win at Go Fish sometimes, though I suspect he's getting wise to my strategy. We talk about kindness during these dinners, about what it means to show up for people when it's inconvenient. We talk about the difference between helping someone because you love them and helping someone because you want something from them. Nana, Emma asked me last week, how do you know if someone really cares about you? I told her, you watch what they do when you need help. You pay attention to whether they show up when it's difficult or expensive or inconvenient for them. What if they can't help? What if they don't have money or time? There are lots of ways to help that don't cost money, sweetheart. You can listen. You can research solutions. You can offer comfort. You can just be present so the person doesn't feel alone. Jake looked up from his cards. What if someone only helps you because they want you to help them later? That's not help, buddy. That's a transaction. Real help doesn't come with an invoice. They don't know about the lottery money. What they know is that Nana shows up. I'm at their school plays and soccer games. I remember their friends' names and their favorite snacks, and I'm always available when they need to talk through friendship drama or homework stress. With Thomas and Renee, I've settled into a different kind of relationship. It's more honest than what we had before, but also more distant.
We still gather for birthdays and holidays, still maintain the rituals of family connection, but the underlying dynamics have changed. Thomas and I have civil conversations now, mostly about safe topics like weather and his work and the kids' activities. When his wife Kayla had her cancer scare 8 months ago, the foundation quietly paid their insurance deductible and out-of-pocket medical expenses. The check came from the foundation, not from me personally, and as far as I know, they never discovered the source of that assistance. I made that choice because cancer is a real emergency, the kind of health crisis that transcends family politics and hurt feelings. But I made sure they couldn't trace it back to me because I didn't want gratitude or renewed expectations of support. I just wanted to help someone deal with a genuinely frightening situation. Renee and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship, though it's different now. She helps with the grandchildren, comes to family gatherings, and we've had a few honest conversations about money and expectations and what went wrong between us. She said, "I think I got used to you always being the solution to our problems. It never occurred to me that you might need us to be the solution to yours. I trained you to think that way. I always said yes, always found a way to help, never asked for anything in return. I created a one-way relationship and then felt hurt when it stayed one way." When she mentioned needing help with kitchen repairs a few weeks ago, I listened sympathetically, but didn't offer to solve the problem. When she and Mark figured out their own solution, a home equity loan that they qualified for easily, I congratulated them on their problem solving without feeling guilty about not rescuing them. It's a healthier dynamic, even if it's less warm than what we used to have. But here's what I've learned that might surprise you, and it's the most important thing I want to share. Money doesn't change people. It illuminates them. It lights up who they really are, like a spotlight on a stage, showing you things that were always there, but maybe hidden in shadow. You see who rushes towards you when you're in trouble, and who finds elaborate reasons to step back. You see who asks, "What do you need?" and who asks, "What did you do wrong?" You see who shows up with solutions and who shows up with lectures. Ruth rushed towards me with $6,000 and a pull-out couch, then asked for nothing when she learned the truth about my situation. That's love. Real, unconditional, no strings attached love. Thomas and Renee looked for reasons why my problem wasn't their responsibility. They weren't evil or malicious. They were just people who had learned to see me as a resource rather than a person. And when I needed to be treated like a person, the relationship broke down. I used to measure my worth by how much I could give away, how many problems I could solve, how useful I could be to the people around me. Now I measure it by whether I'm living my values: dignity, generosity within reason, and clear boundaries. The lottery gave me choices I never thought I'd have. The test gave me clarity about relationships I'd never understood. But being a grandmother, really being present as a grandmother, showing up consistently without needing to be needed, has given me purpose that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love.
Ruth and I have grown even closer this past year. We grocery shop together on Saturdays, take walks around the neighborhood in the evenings, and spend Sunday afternoons working in our gardens and catching up on the week's events. She still catches me cheating at crossword puzzles, and I still pretend to be offended when she calls me out. You know what I love most about our situation now? She told me recently as we sat on her front porch watching the sunset and drinking iced tea. What's that? I never have to worry about whether you're helping me because you feel sorry for me or because you think I can't handle my own life. I know you're doing it because we're family, and family takes care of each other. She was right. The money had removed the power dynamic that exists when one person always needs help and the other person always provides it. Now we could just be sisters, two women who had chosen to build their lives around caring for each other. And I never have to worry about whether I'm taking advantage of your generosity, I replied, because you proved you'd give me everything you had before you knew I had anything to give back. On Thursday nights, when my grandchildren are at my dining room table, laughing over card games and talking about their weeks, I watch their faces and think about the lessons I want them to learn. Not about money, they'll figure out money, but about love, about loyalty, about what it means to be family. Nana, Jake asked me last Thursday, do you think it's bad to be rich? The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask, sweetheart? Some kids at school say rich people are mean and don't care about other people. I thought carefully how to answer. I think money is like any other tool, buddy. It's not good or bad by itself. What matters is how you use it and whether it changes how you treat people. How should you treat people if you have money? The same way you should treat them if you don't have money, with kindness and respect and fairness. Emma looked up from her cards. But if you have a lot of money, shouldn't you help people who don't have enough? If you can help people without hurting yourself or your family, then yes, I think you should. But the most important thing is to help because you care about people, not because you want them to think you're generous. These conversations remind me why I've chosen to keep the lottery win private from most of my family. Money changes how people see you, how they interact with you, what they expect from you. My grandchildren know me as Nana Evie, who makes good spaghetti and always has time to listen to their problems. That's how I want them to remember me. Ruth is the only family member who knows the whole truth, and she's the only one who needed to know. She's the one who proved that her love was unconditional, that her loyalty was real, and that her care for me had nothing to do with what I could do for her. In the end, that test I conducted really wasn't about money at all. It was about love. It was about finding out who loves you for who you are versus who loves you for what you can provide. It was about discovering the difference between conditional and unconditional relationships. Love brings a casserole when you're sick, not a calculator to figure out what it owes you. Love offers a ride to the doctor, not a lecture about responsibility. Love shows up when it's inconvenient, when it costs something, when there's nothing to be gained except the knowledge that you did right by someone you care about. Thomas and Renee love me, I think, but it's a love that comes with conditions and expectations. They love me as their mother, as the person who has always been there to help them, as the foundation of stability in their lives. But when I needed them to love me as a person who sometimes needs help herself, that kind of love wasn't available. Ruth loves me as a sister, as a friend, as a human being who sometimes struggles and sometimes succeeds and sometimes needs support. Her love doesn't depend on my usefulness or my ability to solve problems or my capacity to give. It just is. 1 year after winning the lottery, I sleep better than I have in decades.
Not because I don't have to worry about money, though that's certainly nice, but because I understand my relationships clearly now. I know who I can count on, who counts on me, and what the difference is between loving someone and needing someone. The foundation work gives me purpose, but it's not the desperate purpose of someone trying to prove their worth through generosity. It's the quiet satisfaction of someone who has enough to share and chooses to share it wisely. Ruth's security gives me peace, but it's not the anxious peace of someone trying to buy love or gratitude. It's the deep contentment of someone who was able to repay a lifetime of unconditional care with practical support when it was most needed. And the boundaries I've established with Thomas and Renee give me freedom. Freedom from being seen as the solution to everyone else's problems. Freedom from relationships based on what I can provide rather than who I am. Here's what I want you to remember from my story. Family shows up when it's inconvenient, when it costs them something, when they gain nothing but the knowledge that they did right by someone they love. Everything else is just social obligation masquerading as a relationship. Money reveals character, but it doesn't create character. The people who rush toward you when you're in trouble were always the kind of people who rush toward trouble. The people who step back were always the kind of people who step back. The money just makes it easier to see. And love, real love, doesn't come with terms and conditions. It doesn't require perfect timing or favorable budget circumstances or mutual benefit. It just shows up, does what it can, and asks for nothing but the chance to help. I never told Thomas and Renee about the lottery win. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I won't. But I don't need their approval anymore, and they don't need my money. That's probably healthier for all of us. What I need is what I have. Ruth bringing me soup when I have a cold, my grandchildren calling to tell me about their day, the quiet satisfaction of helping Mrs. Peterson keep her heat on through the winter. I need relationships based on care rather than utility, love rather than transaction, presence rather than provision. The lottery ticket gave me choices I never expected to have, but the test gave me something more valuable: clarity about what love actually looks like when everything else is stripped away. Did this ending shock you or satisfy you? Do you think I handled it the right way, or would you have done something different? Have you ever had to test the people in your life to find out who really cared about you? Share your honest thoughts below. I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on family, money, and what love looks like when it really matters.